My name is Priya Anand. I'm 39 years old, and for 6 years I've told anyone who asked that my marriage to my husband Vikram was the calm, steady center of an otherwise chaotic life. We had a 16-year-old son, Rohan, from my first marriage, whom Vikram had raised as his own since Rohan was 10. We had a house in the Brookhaven subdivision with a finished basement Vikram had converted into a home office because he worked long, unpredictable hours as a commercial real estate broker and needed, he always said, a door he could close. We had a housekeeper named Dolores Reyes, who had been with our family for 4 years, who knew our house better than either of us did, and whose phone call, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April, changed the shape of my entire life. I was at a hair appointment when Dolores called, sitting under the dryer with foils in my hair, half listening to a podcast through one earbud. I almost let the call go to voicemail. Dolores texted more than she called, same as most people these days. But something made me answer, some small animal instinct I've since learned to trust more than I used to. Priya, she said, and I knew instantly something was wrong, because Dolores's voice, usually warm and a little sing-song, was tight and wet, the unmistakable sound of someone trying to talk through tears. Priya, I need you to listen to me carefully. Dolores, what's wrong? Are you okay? I'm at your house. I came to do the Thursday clean, like always. Priya. She stopped, and I heard her take a breath, the kind of breath you take when you're steadying yourself before saying something you can't take back. There is a door in your basement office that is locked. It has always been locked, every Thursday, for 4 years, and I never thought anything of it, because Vikram said it was just old files, tax documents, whatever. Today it was open. By accident, I think, the latch didn't catch. And Priya, I looked inside and now I don't know what to do, and I am telling you, please, when you come home, do not open that door. Call the police first. Please, don't go in there alone. I sat under that hairdryer with foils in my hair and felt the entire architecture of my ordinary Thursday afternoon crack open like ice on a pond. Dolores, what did you see? There was a long pause, and then she told me, I need to explain something about our house before I explain what Dolores found, because the geography matters to understanding just how long this had apparently been sitting, undiscovered, beneath the floor of our ordinary family life. Our basement had 2 sections. The finished half held Vikram's home office, a desk, 2 monitors, a leather chair, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves he'd built himself, the summer Rohan turned 12, the summer the two of them bonded over power tools and bad classic rock on a paint-splattered radio. The unfinished half, behind a plain gray door that most people would assume led to a utility closet or a crawlspace, held the water heater, the furnace, and, tucked into the corner behind a stack of empty moving boxes we'd never gotten around to breaking down, a second door, small, metal, the kind of door you'd find on a root cellar or a storm shelter, fitted with a keypad lock that Vikram had installed himself 2 years ago, telling me, when I asked, that it was for the good scotch and some client files I don't want walking off during a party. I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? We had thrown 2 holiday parties in that basement since the lock went in, and I had never once questioned a locked door in my own house, because that is, I've come to understand, exactly the kind of question a trusting person doesn't think to ask. Dolores, doing her Thursday deep clean, had gone into the unfinished half to sweep behind the water heater, something she did every few weeks, and found the little metal door standing an inch ajar, the keypad's green light blinking, meaning someone had entered the code and simply failed to pull it fully shut behind them. I only meant to close it, she told me later, once I was home and we were sitting together at my kitchen table, both of us shaking. I swear to you, Priya, I did not go looking. I reached to pull it shut and it swung open on its own weight, and I saw, she stopped again. There is a cot in there, a real bed, not just a cot, a mattress, blankets, a little lamp. There are photographs taped to the wall, Priya, dozens of them. And there is a woman's name written on a whiteboard. over and over, in his handwriting. I recognized his handwriting from the grocery lists he leaves for me. I recognized it immediately. I asked her the woman's name. Santa Whitmore, Dolores said. Priya? Do you know that name? I did not at that moment know that name. I would within 11 days come to know it better than almost any name I have ever learned in my life. I did not open that door. I want to be honest that this took genuine, enormous effort, because everything in me, the mother in me, the wife in me, the person who had spent 6 years believing my house held no secrets bigger than which cabinet the good silverware lived in, wanted to drive home at 80 miles an hour, with wet hair full of foils, and tear that door off its hinges myself. But something in Dolores's voice, something in the specific, careful way she'd said, "Do not open that door, call the police first," told me she had seen something that went beyond an affair, beyond even a hidden second life. Affairs don't usually come with keypad locks and whiteboards. Affairs don't usually make a grown woman, who has worked in dozens of houses over a long career, and presumably seen plenty of ordinary human mess, cry on the phone and beg you to call the authorities before you go inside. I left the salon with foils still half in my hair, which the stylist, bless her, simply cut loose with scissors in the parking lot when I explained, badly, through tears, that I had an emergency at home. I called my sister, Anjali, from the car and asked her to pick Rohan up from lacrosse practice and keep him at her house. No explanation offered beyond, "Something's happening at home. I need him somewhere safe. Please don't ask me more right now." And then, sitting in my car outside the salon, hands shaking so hard I had to set the phone down on the dashboard, I called the non-emergency police line, because some instinct told me this situation, whatever it turned out to be, needed exactly the kind of measured, procedural response that a panicked wife bursting through her own basement door could not provide. The dispatcher who answered asked me to describe what I knew. I told her. A locked room in my basement, discovered by my housekeeper, containing what appeared to be a bed, personal photographs, and a woman's name written repeatedly on a whiteboard, in my husband's handwriting. I told her my husband was currently at his office downtown, as far as I knew, and that I did not know whether it was safe to enter the room myself. There was a pause on the line, and then the dispatcher's voice changed, not dramatically, but in a way I noticed, a shift from routine efficiency into something more careful. "Ma'am, I'm going to send officers to your address. I want you to wait outside the house, in your car, with the doors locked until they arrive. Do not go inside. Do not attempt to enter that room." I sat in my driveway with Dolores in the passenger seat, both of us watching the front door of a house I had lived in for 6 years, as though it might at any moment do something we couldn't take back seeing. Dolores held my hand the entire time we waited, and I remember being grateful, in the strange way you're grateful for small kindnesses during the worst moments of your life, that she hadn't just quietly closed that door and said nothing, that whatever loyalty she felt toward our family had, in the crucial moment, pointed her toward honesty rather than tidy silence. "How long has that lock been there?" she asked me quietly, while we waited. 2 years, I said. He told me it was for Scotch and client files. Dolores was quiet for a moment. "Priya, I clean that basement every week. I have never once, in 2 years, seen him actually go down there for Scotch. Not once that I noticed. That detail, small almost nothing on its own, sat in my stomach like a stone, because it told me something I hadn't let myself fully absorb yet. This wasn't a recent development. This had been sitting beneath our ordinary Thursdays, our holiday parties, our family dinners upstairs, for 2 entire years, hidden in plain sight behind a door I had personally, cheerfully, walked past 1,000 times without a second thought. The police arrived 18 minutes later. 2 patrol officers first, followed shortly by a detective named Alvarez, whose calm, methodical presence I would come to be deeply grateful for over the following days. They asked me for consent to enter the home, which I gave immediately, and I watched from my driveway, arms wrapped around myself, as 4 officers went through my front door and down into my basement to open a room my own husband had built, apparently, without me ever once suspecting its true purpose. Detective Alvarez came back out to the driveway almost 40 minutes later, and I could tell from her face, before she said a single word, that whatever they'd found was worse than I had let myself imagine, even in the worst version of my imagination during those 40 minutes of waiting. "Mrs. Anand," she said, "I need you to come sit down with me for a few minutes. There's a lot to explain, and I want to make sure you have accurate information rather than piecing it together from what you can see." What Detective Alvarez told me, over the next hour, sitting in the back of an ambulance that had arrived as a precaution, unraveled 6 years of marriage in a way I am still, months later, working to fully absorb. The room behind that metal door was not, as I had begun to fear in my worst moments, evidence of a body or a captive. No one was inside it. And I want to say that clearly and immediately because I know how a story like this can spiral in a reader's imagination, and I don't want to draw that particular horror out longer than the truth requires. But what was inside was, in its own way, almost harder to make sense of. The room contained an elaborate, years-long shrine to a woman named Santa Whitmore. A woman, it turned out, Vikram had dated briefly in his 20s, before he ever met me, and who had ended their relationship and moved across the country. Photographs, some clearly decades old and some, disturbingly, recent, meaning Vikram had, at some point in the last 2 years, tracked this woman down and begun secretly photographing her home, her current family, without her knowledge. Printouts of her social media posts, going back years, annotated in his handwriting. A folder of documents that the detectives immediately flagged as concerning. Her current address, her children's school schedule, notes about her daily movements. "Mrs. Anand," Detective Alvarez said, in the gentle but unmistakably serious tone of someone delivering news that requires immediate action rather than gradual absorption. "What we found down there isn't just personal. It has the hallmarks of what we'd classify as stalking behavior, sustained over what looks like at least 2 years. We're going to need to contact Ms. Whitmore directly, because based on what's in that room, she may be in danger and may not even know your husband has been tracking her." I sat in the back of that ambulance and felt something in me go very quiet and very still. The particular stillness of a person absorbing information too large to feel all at once. Vikram was arrested that evening, at his office, on charges related to stalking and unlawful surveillance, after detectives confirmed with Santa Whitmore, who lived 4 states away, remarried, with 2 young children, that she had no idea he had ever located her, let alone been tracking her movements and photographing her family for 2 years. She told detectives, in a statement I later read as part of the case file, that she had dated Vikram for 8 months in her 20s, that the relationship had ended because she found his attachment to her intense in a way that scared me a little, even back then, and that she had lost all contact with him for nearly 15 years before this discovery. She had, she said, never once suspected that a man from her 20s, a man she barely thought about anymore, had built a hidden room in his own family home dedicated, in some disturbing way, to preserving and tracking a version of her he apparently never let go of. I want to be careful here, because I know this story could easily become only about the horror of what was found, and I don't want to lose the part of the story that was, in some ways, even harder to sit with. The 6 years I had spent married to a man capable of hiding something this large, this sustained, this careful, directly beneath the floor of our shared life, while showing me, every single day, the face of an attentive husband and a devoted stepfather. I have asked myself, more times than I can count, whether there were signs. There were, I think, in the way there almost always are, visible only in hindsight's cruel clarity. Vikram's insistence on being the only one who cleaned and organized his basement office, even declining Dolores's offers to tidy it. His habit of taking calls in the basement with the door closed, which I had always attributed to work privacy. A trip, 18 months ago, that he'd told me was a real estate conference in a city that I would later confirm through his credit card statements pulled during the investigation, was the same city where Santa Whitmore lived. None of it, on its own, would have raised an alarm in an ordinarily trusting marriage. Together, in hindsight, it forms a pattern so clear it's almost unbearable to look at directly. The hardest conversation of this entire ordeal was not with the police, and it was not, eventually, with Vikram himself. It was with my son. Rohan was 16, old enough to understand most of what had happened, and I made the difficult decision, with the guidance of a family therapist Detective Alvarez recommended, who specializes in cases involving sudden, traumatic family disruption, to tell him the truth in age-appropriate but honest terms, rather than let him piece together a vague, frightening story from news coverage or overheard conversations. Because there was news coverage. A case like this, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, generates exactly the kind of attention no family wants. And I knew Rohan would hear whispers at school, regardless of what I chose to tell him at home. I told him that Vikram, the man who had raised him since he was 10 years old, who had taught him to change a tire and coached his little league team for 2 seasons, and built him a treehouse the summer he turned 11, had also, apparently, been hiding something dark and dangerous beneath our house for years. Something that had hurt another family and put another woman at risk, and that the police had arrested him because of it. Rohan cried in a way I had not seen him cry since he was very young, and then he asked me the question that has, I think, defined the hardest part of grieving this marriage. Was any of it real, Mom? Was he actually my dad? Or was I just part of the house he was hiding in? I did not have a clean answer for him then, and I am not sure I have one even now. What I told him was this: I think a person can be capable of real, genuine love for you, Rohan, and also capable of something dark and hidden that has nothing to do with you at all. I don't think you were part of a disguise. I think you got the real him, in the moments that were actually about you. But I also think there was a whole other part of him neither of us ever got to see, and that part was capable of terrible things. Both of those things can be true at once, and I know that's a hard, uncomfortable thing to hold, but I think it's more honest than pretending it was all fake, or pretending none of it was. I have thought, endlessly, in the months since, about what would have happened if Dolores had simply closed that door and said nothing. If she'd decided, in that split second in our basement, that a locked room behind a keypad was none of her business, that her job was to clean, not to investigate, that raising an alarm might cost her a job she needed and a family she'd grown close to over 4 years. I asked her, weeks later, why she called me instead of simply closing the door and pretending she'd never seen it. Because I have a daughter, she told me, sitting across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first heard the details of what she'd found. And because I looked at that room, Priya, and I understood, even before I fully understood what it was, that something was very wrong, and that wrong things do not get better by being kept quiet. I have seen in my own life what happens when people decide silence is safer than the truth. I decided a long time ago I would not be one of those people again, no matter what it might cost me. Dolores never lost her job with our family, though the shape of that job has changed considerably, given that I sold the Brookhaven house within 4 months of Vikram's arrest, unable to sleep another night in a home that had held that room beneath it for 2 years without my knowledge. She still works for me in the smaller house Rohan and I moved into together, and she has become, in the aftermath of the worst thing that has ever happened to my family, something closer to family herself than an employee. The person who called me in tears, rather than let me walk, unknowing, back into a house holding a secret that could have cost someone their life. I reached out to Santa Whitmore once, about 4 months after Vikram's arrest, through her attorney, not to intrude further on a life he'd already intruded on far too much, but because I felt I owed her something, an acknowledgement, at minimum, that I understood the fear she must have felt, learning a man from her past had been secretly tracking her family for years without her knowledge. She wrote back, briefly, through her attorney, a short note that I have kept, folded, in a drawer I don't open often. She thanked me for reaching out. She said she did not blame me for what Vikram had done, that she understood I had no idea, that in some strange way she was relieved it had come to light before anything worse had happened, because, and this was the part of her note that has stayed with me longest. She said she had always had a quiet, unnamed unease about him, even decades ago, that she'd never been able to fully explain to anyone, and that some part of her had always wondered, without evidence, whether he'd ever really let her go. The title of this story, if you're watching it as I've told it to a camera, rather than reading it as I've written it down, comes from something I said to Detective Alvarez months later, during a follow-up conversation about the case. I wish I had listened. Not to Dolores. I did listen to her, and that decision may have prevented something far worse than what actually happened. What I meant, and what I've come to understand more fully with time and considerable therapy of my own, is that I wish I had listened, years earlier, to the small, quiet instincts I'd had and dismissed, the closed basement door, the too convenient work trips, the particular tightness in Vikram's voice whenever anyone brought up his life before me. I had those instincts. I chose, over and over, small choice by small choice, to override them with trust, because trust is easier to live inside than suspicion, and because I loved him, and because 6 years of ordinary Tuesdays and packed lunches and little league games had built, in my mind, a version of him solid enough that I couldn't easily imagine a locked room hiding beneath it. I don't say this to blame myself for what Vikram hid. He built that room. He made those choices, alone, over years, with a level of deliberate concealment that no amount of attentiveness on my part might have uncovered sooner. But I have learned, in the aftermath, that the instincts we override to keep a peaceful household running are not always wrong simply because they're inconvenient, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person in your life can do. The way Dolores did for me, on a rainy Thursday, in tears, refusing to simply close a door and say nothing, is to hand you the truth you were already circling, even when you weren't quite ready to hold it yourself. Rohan and I are rebuilding, slowly, in a smaller house with no basement, which I chose deliberately, unable to imagine living again above a room I couldn't see into. Dolores still comes twice a week. Vikram's case is still moving through the courts as I write this, and I don't yet know what the final outcome will be, only that whatever it is, it will not undo the 2 years a hidden room sat beneath my family's ordinary life, holding a truth I never once suspected, until a phone call in a rainy parking lot, and a housekeeper brave enough to say, through tears, the 4 words that likely saved more than one life. Don't open that door. The end.